Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 6 in the discourse Tzion b'mishpat Tipadeh, which 5672, which is the 11th discourse in the overall book, B'shar Shekdimu 5672. And this is class number, I think, 3. I'm not sure. I've got to check. In either class number 3 or class number 4 in chapter 42 in the book. And we were learning how the Chachma experience, the Chachma stage, is utterly above and beyond the experience of Bina, and that which goes from the Chachma to the Bina is only the true substance of Chachma does not carry over into Bina. That's why Bina is called Ayin to Chachma. Two things. The Bina is called Ayin to Chachma because it's only external crust forming around the Hanacha. Remember, we were learning last time. We were learning that when you have a Chachma experience, there's two levels. There's the higher level of Chachma, which are completely, utterly beyond any relationship to intelligence at all. It's just a pure vision. It's a seeing. The mind sees something. We learned that is by very, very high and deep and very, very strong minds, very, very high level intellectuals that have that ability to be able to see things in their mind. You got to probably strengthen your brain very, very much to be able to have that, strengthen your mind, meaning a lot of deep thinking that brings a person to open up that power in the mind to be able to see a certain truth, even though it's utterly beyond any kind of an explanation, any kind of intellectual conception. But then there is another level, which is much closer already to our experiences, and we all have that. And that's when we have a brainstorm and epiphany, where there is light or a revelation that enters into our experience, not in a way of a vision, but in a way of a certain truth, like lays itself into our consciousness. The point over here is that it's not modified and it's not descriptive. It's the essence of whatever it is that we are beholding. And then, because this Chachma experience needs to fuel and bring ahead a continuum of descent more into our vessels, into our limited scope of existence, it has to turn into a language. And that's what happens in this Chachma, that in the most external element of this Chachma, there is already an outer crust of a language of intel. And it's that outer crust of the Chachma that the Bina latches itself onto, and that's, which is the Nekuda of the Haskala of the Chachma, the Seichel of the Chachma, inner inlay of the Chachma. That Bina doesn't capture at all. But the external element of the Chachma, that goes over, and then Bina takes that Nekuda Seichel and fleshes it out. The French, it breaks it open with all of its details and sub-details and sub-details, and so on and so forth. All right. So that is what we learned. And then he says, and that's the reason why we know that Chachma is called Das Elyon, the higher Das. In Chachma, we learned in last class that there is the higher Das and the lower Das. Is a perspective from God to the world, where he sees the nothingness of existence in comparison to the real substance. God is real. God is the true being, and everything other than him is absolute nothing. And the perspective of the creation is that we feel the systems and the borders and the boundaries of our existence as something real, and the power that is powering it all, that is above it all, that's bringing into existence, is although we admit and we recognize and we might even have a strong conviction in its existence, but it's still a very vague and distant reality, so much that we call it nothing. Chachma is the level of Chachma is a stage and a state of that still holds on to that absolute divine understanding. And even though Chachma is already part of the 10 Sfiros, and it starts being, we might say it's still It's the beginning of the system, of the entire system of creation and of worlds. But yet, it is above the system. That's what we've been learning earlier. It's higher than Ishtalshalos. Because Chachma is the first Keli, where the complete emes, the substance of the Ein Sof, is revealing itself in Chachma. And that's the reason why in Chachma, there is still the perspective that he is and there's not but him. And when we are entering into Chachma, like remember we spoke that on Shabbos, we're elevated into Chachma. Or sometimes we go to a big tzaddik, a Rebbe, his consciousness is the consciousness of Chachma. They can beam us into that level of Chachma, and suddenly all of our concerns and worries and things kind of disappear in 1 second, and we're living in a different reality. We're living with an absolute confidence in God's emes, and that he is and there's not but him, and so on and so forth. That's the idea of this Chachma experience. Shabbos, as we discussed, we can even eat food and have pleasure, and the worlds are so nothing that pleasure of the food is only Hashem, and that's why, without any trace of disconnect, because Shabbos is Chachma. But once you're operating from the world of Bina, although it's even on the divine level of Bina, there's already a certain distortion. What I mean to say is there's a certain fog. It doesn't see anymore so clearly. Why? Because to it, it's already information. It knows the Ein Sof, but it knows the Ein Sof as a subject. It doesn't know the Ein Sof as knowing it intimately. That's what we learned in the last class. So this idea that we said that in Chachma is Das Elyon, and we explained now that means because the substance of the Ein Sof is fully manifest and revealed in Chachma, even in the lower levels of Chachma. The Hanacha, that the inlay of the Ein Sof is present in Chachma. So he remember we said we missed a little parentheses in last class. So let's do the parentheses now. In other places in Chassidus, there is another explanation for Chachma, which minimizes the Chachma experience and sees the Chachma experience as a lesser, not as high as we are. We're giving more credit to Chachma than it's given to Chachma in other places. In other places of Chassidus, it says that the real power of Das Elyon, the higher Das, is in Keser. That's where you have the perspective that Kula Kamei Kalochshev, because that is the Or Ein Sof itself. Chachma is only receiving a ray of the Or Ein Sof. True. In Chachma is shining a ray of the Or Ein Sof. So therefore, the Yesha Amiti, the true substance of God, which makes him be the only reality, and other than him, nothing else can exist, and therefore the worlds are absolute nothing. That perspective is not the level of Chachma. Oh, but does that mean that Chachma is not Das Elyon, is not included in the higher Das? No. Chachma is included in the higher Das, but to a lesser degree. What does that mean? It means like this. The question is the etzem of the Or Ein Sof dwelling in Chachma, or is only a ray of the Or Ein Sof dwelling in Chachma? The way we're learning now, Chachma, that Chachma is just an open window, which allows a higher truth to come in. In that sense, if we apply that to the Or Ein Sof entering into the sphere of Chachma, the same thing happens, that the Or Ein Sof itself it finds a nest in the Keli of Chachma. And therefore, Chachma is receiving the true Yesha Amiti, and therefore Chachma knows Einod Movado does not but him. Although Chachma is a Keli, is a vessel, but it's a vessel where the Or Ein Sof itself, the Yesha Amiti, is dwelling. That's the explanation we learned now. He's saying, but this is unlike what's explained in other places as follows. Only in Keser is the Or Ein Sof. Chachma gets only a ray of the Or Ein Sof. But since it's a very pure ray, and a ray is attached to the ray feels its source. So the ray that's shining in Chachma knows, it has a sense of the source of the ray, because Or is Davuk b'Ma'or, because light is connected to the Ma'or. So therefore, the Ma'or, which means the luminary, where the light comes from. Since the Ma'or is the Yesh Amiti, is the true being, the Or has the sense that the source from where it comes from is the Yesh Amiti, is the true being, and therefore it can't feel itself as something of substance. It knows it's ayin, it's nothing, it's only a ray of a Yesh Amiti. So therefore it too retains the purity of the Das Elyon, that there's the higher Das, that Einod Movado, there's nothing but God, and that he is and anything besides him is not. But not because Chachma itself is privy to experiencing Yesh Amiti. Chachma doesn't experience Yesh Amiti directly. It's a ray, and a ray that knows its source. Let's read it in Tzarek. That the higher Das, the Chachma, who rak, he's minimizing it. The real Das Elyon is only in Keser and above Keser. Once you're going into the Atzilus and into Spheros, you're already you don't have any more. You're already beginning the experience of Das Tachton, the lower Das. However, the Das Elyon is kind of protruding out of its zone. It's entering into the space of Chachma to give Chachma a taste, if you might say, of the higher Das. This that Chachma law is Das Elyon Rak Masha Shebachachma Musag. In Chachma it's apprehended, it's Hadei Al Yoina, the higher Das. Eich what? She'ain Soif, how the Ein Soif that's not, that Chachma doesn't know intimately, but the Chachma knows that the Ein Soif is the Yesh Amiti, and knows it in a very deep way. Nothing. And what does that mean? Chachma who ha'ara. Chachma is only a ray. Only a ray. In other words, there's no translations of the ray. You're not translating it into words like Bina does. You're not putting it into a concept. You're just allowing the ray to shine as it is. Therefore, it's a ha'ara hadvuka that's still connected b'makoira in its source. Musag, then it's apprehended, umurgash, and it is felt, sham, even in the ray, echshel ein soif, how the ein soif from where the ray comes from, who ayesh amiti is the true being, v'kulakamei kalachshiv, and all before him is not. And through this, hachachma atzma. So it works like this. Since the ray senses the source from where it comes from, the ray knows that above it, above the ray is the Yesh Amiti. And as a result of that, this ray feels utterly insignificant and existenceless to its source. The Chachma itself, has that bittul, the kalachashiv, to be considered as nothing. It's almost like the question like this. If the Chachma, what's the difference between the two? The way I'm understanding it now. Maybe I'm wrong, but I hope I'm understanding it correctly. According to the way we're learning in our Maimer, that Chachma is a recipient of mamish, of the essence of the Or Ein Sof, then Chachma is not really, from this perspective, not part of the Kula Kamei Kalachshiv, that all before him is not. Chachma is part of God's identity as he is the Yesh Amiti. Now, there's 2 points to the. There's two sides to the coin of Das Elyon. One side of the coin of Das Elyon is that Hashem is the Yesh Amiti. He is the true being. The other side of the coin of this day of the higher perspective, Kula Kamei Kalachshem, all before him is not. Whatever is, knows everything of creation, everything that is not pure or Ein Sof is ayin, is nothing, has no existence at all. Other than the fact that God is every second willing it, but he's willing it through a little nothing of his energy, therefore it's nothing even after we die. So the question is, from which side of the coin is Chachma? According to our explanation, we're learning earlier that the Yesh Amiti is residing in Chachma. So Chachma is part of the Yesh Amiti. And therefore it knows that anything, that the Keli of Chachma maybe is Kali Chashiv, is nothing, but the worlds are nothing, but it looks down. It's looking down below itself and saying everything below itself is Kalachshiv, is nothing. It's that Chachma looks at Bina and says, "Oy, pathetic." Anything lower than that is nebach ayin, nothing. But chachma is part of the yesh amiti. That's our explanation. The explanation that he's now saying in the parentheses is no. Chachma is part of the ayin because chachma is already outside of the yesh amiti. But because chachma is so close to the source where the yesh amiti is, the chachma really experiences itself as utterly ayin. But Bina doesn't. Bina sees already itself as yesh, as something of substance, and chachma and above, and chachma and keser and the Or Ein Sof as ayin, as nothingness, because it's above the experience of Bina. And Bina doesn't have such an intimate knowledge of the Or Ein Sof that it should be total batal, like it doesn't exist. So these are the two explanations. The way I understand it is, according to what we're learning here, chachma is, it's almost like, how does God see it? God says, I am. God can say, I am the yesh amiti. According to the first explanation, chachma is part of that I am. I am the yesh amiti. It's like you have two levels of tzaddikim. You had tzaddikim who you saw in them the biggest humility. They had no mitzias at all. And they were humble, and the praises that we sing about them is like unbelievable bittul. But then there's even a higher tzaddik, who you see in them tremendous presence of being not bittul. And the reason for that is because they're so bittul that they've lost completely their identity so deeply that they don't exist, and now their existence is nothing other than God's existence through them. Like Rabbi Yochai says, 3 times a year, the Zohar says, come see the face of God. Who's the face of God? The face of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The Reuven used to walk with like a king, and yet he was the most humble, but he was because he was in the state of being totally unified. In the Rebbe, you saw tkifus, unbelievable, like bittul on the one hand, but on the other hand, the tkifus of like a power of like, because and the Rebbe can say, I said. Like when the Rebbe sings, you see, even when the Rebbe sings Tzamlach HaNafshi one time, the Rebbe changes the words of the song. You can see clearly Shechina Medaberes. He says, Lirois, everybody wants to see Uscha, instead of saying Uscha, your might, Uchvaidecha, and your glory, which the Rebbe usually sang. Here the Rebbe changes the word Lirois Uzi to hear my strengths, Uchvaidi, and my power. What happens to the Rebbe then? Because at this moment, he and the Eibishter are one. This is this higher level of bittul, the bittul of Chachma. According to the way we understand Chachma over here, Chachma is one with the Yesh Amiti. But according to the explanation in the parentheses over here, Chachma is on a lesser level. And again, Chassidus sees it sometimes Chachma like this and sometimes Chachma like that. Chachma itself is in the state of bittul of kalachashiv. Shua bittul the Yechudei. It's the bittul of Yechudei, of the higher unity. But according to what it's explained over here, who the bechachma, then a chachma meir Or Ein Sof b'chinas yesh amiti. Chachma itself is lit up with the Or Ein Sof, who is the yesh amiti. V'hainu b'chinas ha'atzmos, not the ray, the essence. Shalamayla ma'asaga, that is completely beyond grasp. It's not that chachma is grasping; it's not grasping anything. The chachma is imbued with the yesh amiti. And therefore, anything that's seichel, anything of intellectualism and asaga and grasping, that's ayin, that's nothing. The kalachashiv, it is kilachashiv, it is like not in front of Hashem. Good. And therefore, chachma is yesh, and bina, and downward is ayin. Unlike when we say sometimes that bina is yesh and chachma is ayin. Well, it depends who you're talking to. From das tachten, from the lower das, bina is yesh, bina is something. Because chachma is higher than any grasp, and chachma is part of the yesh amiti, it's considered ayin. But from the perspective of chachma, then the Or Ein Sof, until chachma, including chachma, is the yesh, is what's really real, and bina is ayin. Okay. Now we're continuing further in the discourse. Now we're going to skipping a little bit. We're continuing further. This is after the second parentheses, because the second parenthesis we learned already. But now we continue. Zasha Chachma Nikra Kodesh. And that's also the explanation why Chachma is called holy. And the emphasis over here is Kodesh without a Vav. Not Kadosh. Like we say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. That's spelled with a Vav. But Kodesh. Chachma is called Kodesh. Like it says, Ushamartem Esa Shabbos. You should observe Shabbos. Ki Kodesh, he, because she is holy. And it uses the word Kodesh. And we know. And again, Kodesh without a Vav. You do what it is known, the Shabbos, that Shabbos, who Gili, Moichen Da'ab. How does he know that Chachma is called Kodesh? Because Shabbos is called Shabbos Kodesh. And what's Shabbos? What is the spiritual dynamic of Shabbos? What is the divine dynamic of Shabbos? The divine dynamic of Shabbos is that on Shabbos, the entire world opens up to a luminance of Chachma. Chachma shines into the world, and for sure into every neshama. That's neshama yisera. And we have a much higher level of divine capacity and consciousness on Shabbos. We're operating from Chachma. And Chachma is God himself is present in Chachma. And therefore, we're not allowed to do anything. That's why Shabbos is like a day that we put down, we shut down our businesses and everything, because when God is here, as explained in Chassidus, you can't make any movement of self. So we're in a state of total bittul. And on a higher level, as we discussed, I guess when Mashiach will come, we will be in a level that we're not buttled to the Eibishter, but we are him on Shabbos. Again, the two explanations on Chachma we can say on Shabbos as well. But he says this, but what is the meaning of Kodesh? The real essence of the meaning Kodesh means separated. Something that is separated, something that doesn't mix. The Isa Zohar, as he explains over here, Zohar says, Kodesh umila begarmei. Kodesh, or Kodesh, is a word unto itself. When you have the word Kadosh, it's already connecting the Kodesh to what follows. What is the Vav? The Vav means, Vav is a download. Vav is a pipeline. So what the Vav is doing is the Vav is a channel to take transcendental, something that is utterly transcendental, and draw it down. And therefore, once you're saying Kadosh, you're already connecting, and therefore the level that could be Kadosh with a Vav is much lower than Kodesh. Kodesh is the light of the Ein Sof as it is to itself, and it's not mixing with anything. Now, so utterly above any level, meaning it's above any revelation. No one can grasp it. No one can hold it. Now we understand, if based on what we're learning now, that in Chachma, especially according to the higher explanation of Chachma, that in Chachma there is like this Maimer is saying, that Chachma is really above intellect and above Hasaga completely. Either it's the vision of Chachma, the higher part of Chachma, where it's seeing it as it is. So there's a full manifestation of the Or Ein Sof into the Chachma, like when you're seeing something, you're allowing that entity to enter into your space, as is. Or even on the lower level of Chachma, which are Hanacha Sichlis, as we just said earlier. But it's still, as we said earlier, it's the full revelation, it's the entrance of whatever it is that you're knowing into your space. And in our case, it would be the Or Ein Sof coming into Chachma. So now we'll understand why this level is separated from every other level. The Piddush Kodesh, why Yesa Muvdal. Kodesh Kamoisha Inyan Avdalu She'ena Mis'arevim Digmasa. Now, when you say something is separated, on the one hand it's separated, but on the other hand there is a certain reason you're saying it's separated. It's like you're making a bunch of you're making, I don't know, I'm thinking right now, when you buy an esrog, you go to the esrog dealer, they have a bunch of esrog, and you can see there's 2-3 boxes sitting there. And when you ask the merchant, is he selling to the millionaires who are going to drop you? But on the other hand, it's sitting on the table because it's an esrog. Right? I'm going to say that and an apple, when you're selling apples, you put in, and there's an esrog there. It's not part of the apples. When you have a very, very special apple amongst the other apples, and it's really above a complete different quality, you say separate. So, for instance, it says regarding the Jewish people, says, "Va'avdel eschem," I separated you from the nations. We're humans, like amongst the humanity. You separate. You don't say an angel is separated from people because he's in a complete different range, a complete different realm that's not separated. So separated is there's a certain reason why you might want to mix it, but yet it's not. So above Chachma, Keser is not Kodesh. Because Keser is Ein Sof, there's no relationship to the world at all. But Chachma is Kodesh. Why is Chachma Kodesh? Because Chachma is already the beginning of a Keli. It's already entering into the system. Yet, in that level of Chachma, there's the Or Ein Sof, which never carries over further. That's what he's explaining over here. It doesn't mix with something that is similar to it. Something that appears to be the same. And similar to it, a love to it. If you separate something from something that doesn't have any commonality with, it's not called a separation. Just like it's not possible to say that a human being is separated from an animal. A human being, you can't say separated from a cow because he's not at all, there's no equation there. When you're separated from something that is similar, you say a wise man, amongst other intellectuals, he stands out. Like when you're saying a wise man, when you say about this guy, he's like, wow, an incredible, he's a genius of geniuses. What do you mean? What you're trying to say is even amongst the upper elite intellectuals of the world, this is on a different level. Or you say amongst the doctors, this is like the top doctor. To say that he's separated from ordinary people who know nothing about medicine, for sure. They don't have that entire quality. They don't have in the substance of intelligence. They're just very average. It doesn't mean anything. To the wise people, there is a certain equation over there. And then we can say they're separated. Something that has episadimion, which means some kind of a connection. Like for Moshe Avdallah, you can apply separation. Even though it's separated, it doesn't mix with it. The same is about Chachma. On the one hand, it's the beginning of an intellectual process. But on the other hand, we're saying, no, it's separated. It's separated from being grasped in intellect. Now he says we can't be applying this to the higher level of Chachma, the vision of Chachma, because we said that is not in the realm of intellect at all. That's not in the realm of intelligence at all. It's not close. It's a complete different. It's like an angel to people. It's a whole different reality. Even the intellectual side of Chachma, it is similar to the grasp of Bina. This is the point, and Bina will just dissect that point. But in truth, it's separated from the grasp of Bina. Because the essential idea of the Sichli, the Chachma Metzad Atzmai, is really above the entire Hasaga in truth. It's mainly a setting in where Chachma sets itself into Bina. I'm sorry, into the reality of it, lays itself into the soul, and that element of it never gets carried over to the Bina. And this that Chachma is Seichel and comes in Hasaga, it's not its essence at all. It's an outer crust, like we said earlier. That comes through a contraction, like we said earlier. And we will leave this over here.